So we've been talking a lot about functions. We've defined what functions are. For every input, there is one output value, only one output value for each input value. We've talked about domain and range as a way to describe functions. We've looked at graphs, we've looked at tables, we've looked at equations. We've done a lot of stuff with functions, but now let's actually talk about function notation. So because we love functions, because they're so important as we get into higher levels of math about what is and what isn't a function, let's actually talk about what is function notation. How do we designate what is a function, what isn't a function? So a function is a relationship. Let's kind of review some things. It's a relationship between two variables. And generically, we like to use x and y. The definition is for every input value, there is only one output value. And going off that, we've talked about how we can use equations as functions. Let's take a very easy equation right here. Let's do y equals 3x plus 1. Okay, so let's think about making a table of values here, right? We can input x values. Let's just do 0, 1, and 2. And I can get some output of x values, some output y values, right? So if I put 0 in for x, then y equals 3 times 0, I'm substituting it in for the x value, plus 1. And if I input 0, it looks like I get an output value of 3 times 0 is 0, plus 1, I get an output value of 1. If I input an x value of 1, now I have y equals 3 times 1 plus 1, which is going to be 4. And if I input a value of 2, my output value y is 3 times 2 plus 1, which equals 7. So we've done stuff like this before. This is not complicated math, but I really want to emphasize this idea of inputs and outputs, and a function is, as I input an x value, my function transforms that number and I get some sort of value back for y based on the relationship, based on this equation, this pattern that I'm showing here. So in this case, we have a function, and when we know we have input values and output values and we have a function, we can use function notation. So here we got a function. I'm going to designate this as a function now. So function notation, it's a little bit different, but it's also really similar. So it says we have a function. A lot of times we use f for function. In my function, I'm going to input values x into my function. When I do that, here's what happens. I take x, I multiply it by 3, and I add 1. What we just did is took that relationship between x and y, and we wrote the same thing in function notation. Okay, so this is a little bit new here. Let's kind of break this down a little bit. This part right here, that's not math. That's not f times x, even though we're used to seeing parentheses and thinking multiplying. This is just the name of the function. We use f a lot, but we can also use g, we also use h, we could use s, we use c, we use lots of things, name of a function. So f tells me this function is function f. I'm also, based on this part, defining what I'm inputting. So I'm defining my variable, defining the input variable. So I'm inputting values in for x into my function f. And what happens, I'm going to write this over here too, is that as I take x values and input them into my function f, what do we get back? I get back output values. I get back my y variable. So you can see the function is kind of the transformation of what turns input values into output values. All right, so there's some function notation. We took this linear equation relating x and y. We defined some inputs and output values. And then we rewrote it as function notations. I rewrote it as f of x equals 3x plus 1. It's the same math. It's the same equation, the same operations, but now I'm designating this as a particular function. And my function is what I put input values in, I get output values back. So for kicks, let's take these input values and output values that I already have, and let's write them as function notation. So in my function, based on this first value, I input 0 in for x, and we got back a value of 1 for y. That's just based on this first row right here. This is 0 right there, and that 1 right there. In the second row, what did we input? We input a value of 1, and I got back a value of 4. So my function f of 1 gives me an output value of 4. And for the last one, if I input a value of 2, what did we get back? If I input 2 in for x into my function, we got back a y value of 7. So function notation, I can use tables, I can use equations like I have. It's the same math, but now I have a way, a notation of writing it as a function of inputs and outputs and writing things out like that.